Welcome again to Read the Bible with me every day. And thank you for joining me tonight on Reading the Bible with me every day. Before I begin, I want to apologize for not showing up for the past 2-3 weeks. What happened? Did I stop doing the Bible study? No, absolutely. I did not stop. So what happened was I had to move apartments. As you can see, my background is slightly different from the view that you guys had with the cars moving behind. This one actually has a lake view actually. But I had to move and it just took time between packing, moving, unpacking, adjusting to the new setting. And I think somewhere along the line, I got lazy a little bit and God had to wake me up like, oh, you have work to do. But I thank God for his grace. I thank God for bringing me back. I never forgot you. I'm glad that I'm back and we can continue on to read the Bible every day. So today we're just going to continue on from where we left off, which was we had read Genesis chapter 36. And in 36, we just basically read about the genealogy of Esau and his great grandkids and descendants and all of that. So we didn't actually talk about it really. But today I want us to talk about Genesis chapter 37 because there's a whole lot going on in this chapter. And I can guarantee you there's a whole lot that goes on even in the subsequent chapters after this. And so because there's so much detail in this chapter, I want to just go verse by verse and talk about it. Unless there's nothing to talk about in that verse. So we're just going to start with verse 1 of Genesis 37. So Jacob, Israel, lived in the land where his father Isaac had been a stranger, sojourner, resident alien in the land of Canaan. So I wanted to point out here that Israel made it important. It was important for him to go back not just to any land in Canaan, but the land where his grandfather Abraham lived, where his father Isaac lived. It was important to claim and hold on to that territory. So that was why he went back, because remember, God had instructed him after his sons did what they did to Shechem and Ham. God had instructed him to go back to that land. And he made sure not to go back with the foreign gods that his children and his wives had. So he instructed them to get rid of those idols and go back to this land to his generation, his father, his grandfather. This land was sacred to them because this was a land that God had apportioned and chosen for them to dwell in. So I just wanted to point that out and just to show the significance of that. Then verse 2, it says, these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The boy was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's secondary wives, and Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. And so the question I first had is, why these sons? These are the sons of the maids. Why is it that Joseph is shepherding the flock with these specific sons? Why wasn't he shepherding the flock with the sons of Leah? Well, my thought, and this is just my thought, don't quote me on it, is that there's still this dysfunction in this family and in their relationship where Joseph would take pleasure in giving a bad report about his brothers, especially these specific brothers that are the sons of the maids, Bilhah and Zilpah, and give a bad report about them to their father to make them look bad. So why is it that Joseph is doing this? It just goes into the type of dysfunction that this family has. It's something that I'm pretty sure Joseph himself had inherited, something that he had seen happen around him. It could be maybe the way that Jacob or Israel had been treating these boys, and Joseph adopted that. And the reason why I wanted to point this out is because we need to be mindful how we treat our children. Do not treat one child differently from the other, because your children are watching your actions and they follow in the footsteps that you take. And so if they think that you hate one child over another, then they will follow in that step and help you hate that child even more. It's the same thing with anything that you do. As a parent, and I'm speaking to you parents, be mindful of the actions that you take, the things that you do. Your children are watching you and they are following in your footsteps. I believe that this is what I see happening here with Israel and Joseph, along with these 4 sons of his that are the sons of the maids Zilpah and Bilhah. So now we'll move on to verse 3, which says, now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a distinctive multicolored tunic. Remember how I said earlier in verse 2, don't love one child more than the other? Well, that's exactly what Israel did here, is he loved the second to the youngest more than the other children. And why is this? This is because Joseph was the son of the woman that he loved, the one that he actually spent 14 years in labor working for Laban just to marry her. So there's this importance about that. And here's another thing. He did not even hide it. He did not hide it. He created a tunic of multicolors and gave to only Joseph. Now imagine how his other brothers would feel. First, the sons of the maids are being given bad reports to their father because of Joseph. Now, all the other 9 sons now see how much their father loves Joseph way more than they are. And the problem with things like this is it makes the others feel insignificant. And what that breeds at some point is jealousy, envy, anger, hatred, resentment. And so when I tell you parents, please do not love one child over the other, do not treat one child more special than the other, this is what I'm talking about, is that you're setting in place a certain type of character for the child that is not loved. And that character will grow up with them. And they become the child that is always angry, envious, discontent, grumbling, and could even harm someone else to get what they want because they never had it as a child. And it makes children like that difficult to understand what love looks like because they never experienced it from their parents. And I say this because the first and most important type of love that a child should get is from the parents. And so parents, love your children affectionately, equally. Even if you don't love them equally, show them love equally. Let them know and understand that you as a parent love them unconditionally, just the same way God loves you, right? And they grow up with that understanding of that love. And you see it in their character because it's part of what you're bringing up when you raise them. All right, so we'll move on to verse 4, which says, his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than all his brothers, so they hated him and could not find it within themselves to speak to him on friendly terms. We see in verse 4 what I just said. When they feel left out, when they feel like secondary to one sibling, they hate the sibling. And that was exactly what happened here, to the point where they could not even speak to him. What a dysfunctional relationship this is. I mean, I can also only imagine the type of pressure this puts on Joseph himself. Because now he cannot have a loving relationship with his brothers. And so what does he do? He now has to prove a point to them that no, if you can't give me your love, I have something better than the love that you can give me. I've got my Father's love. And so I'm going to show you how much my Father loves me more than you guys. And so we'll see it even in the other verses, how Joseph now interacts with his brothers. So let's look at verse 5. Now, Joseph dreamed a dream and told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. Now, I want you to keep in mind that Joseph knew that his brothers did not like him. We saw that in verse 5. He knew that his brothers could not even stand to speak to him. Then Joseph had this dream, which, by the way, we don't know the dream yet, but he shares it with his brothers. Now, why do you think he shared it with his brothers? We're going to read it in the subsequent verses. He said to them, "Please listen to the details of this dream which I have dreamed. We, brothers, were binding sheaves of grain stalks in the field, and lo, my sheaf suddenly got up and stood upright and remained standing. And behold, your sheaves stood all around my sheaf and bowed down in respect." And his brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us? Are you going to rule and govern us as your subjects?" So they hated him even more for telling them about his dreams and for his arrogant words. So here's the thing. Joseph knew that this dream was going to bother his brothers. He knew that this dream was going to ruffle their feathers, but he wanted to ruffle their feathers anyway. So he told them the dream because he wanted to let them know that he was more superior than them, and that in the future he was going to be more superior than them, rubbing it in their faces. Now, what does that tell you about Joseph's character? What I saw in this is that Joseph is an arrogant guy. Arrogant kid that shows off, upsets people, does not care about anybody's feelings, does not care about who likes him or not, as long as his father likes him. Everybody else can just kick rocks or whatever the people say. That is what I see here as part of Joseph's character in this chapter. So now we move on to verse 9, and then we'll talk a little bit about that. But Joseph dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers as well. He said, "See here, I have again dreamed a dream, and lo, this time I see 11 stars, and the sun and the moon bowed in respect to me." Now, here's another thing. He already got the reaction that he was expecting from his brothers the first time he told them the first dream. He knew they were not going to be happy about it. He wanted to ruffle their feathers. He succeeded in doing that and in showing his superiority. And now he told them again. But it doesn't end there. He didn't leave it this time. He didn't leave it to just telling his brothers. We're going to see in the next verse, in verse 10, what he does next. He told it to his father as well as to his brothers. But his father rebuked them and said to him in disbelief, "What is the meaning of this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow down to the ground in respect because of you, before you?" Here's my thoughts. Israel created a monster. That's just my thoughts. He created a monster called Joseph. Joseph, in my person, and this is just my personal opinion, Joseph is the person that he is or was in this chapter because of his father. Because of the way his father raised him, because of the way his father treated his brothers, he became a product of his environment. And this product was not a very good product. And so we are seeing all these character flaws in Joseph. But we're going to see later on in the subsequent chapters how God starts to reshape this flawed person into a new product, which is not a product of his environment anymore, but a product of his relationship and fellowship with God. I just wanted to point that out and say that just because you're a product of your environment does not mean that you remain a product of your environment. Because when God calls you as a Christian, he calls you with all those flawed characters and all. He calls you even as you are a product of your environment. But hear this. Be ready to be reshaped and remolded. Because what God is going to do is shed off all that flawed characters of yours. He's going to remove every single thing. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be painful experience. But when he removes that, what he does is he removes all of that flawed character to reveal the real you, the actual person that he created. You know, when the Bible talks about all things have passed away, all things have become new, it's not saying about just creating a new creature. It's saying the new creature is the you that has always been there, but has been covered up by sin and by you being a product of your environment. I'm a loving person, and I know that. But once upon a time, I didn't used to know that. I used to think I was an angry person. And so when I became this gentle, loving person, I was like, where did it come from? What did God do? How did he shape me up? What did he do? But what I realized over time was that loving, gentle person has always been there all along. What happened was it was buried beneath the pain, the anger, the frustration, the hatred, the resentment that I had been carrying with me because I was a product of my environment. And so when God was ready to work with me or deal with me, he started to shed those things off. And when he shed them off, the real me came out. The me that was just loving, the me that was gentle, compassionate, the me that was very understanding came out. But also in that refining moment, and I call it a refining moment because it's kind of like when you take gold. The shiny gold has always been there underneath that raw material. So when you take your raw gold, in order for you to get that shiny, refined material, you've got to put it in fire, right? And what the fire does is it now gets rid of all that raw materials, all that dirt, all that flawed parts of that gold. Now, I saw a video that gave it even a better description, which I'm going to share with you. And then if the goldsmith or whoever the diamond person is, brings it out and still sees some flaws, he puts it back in the fire and refines it even more until all the flaws are out. And then you get this beautiful, shiny, nice diamond that has always been there all along. But it was hidden under the raw, flawed stuff. It was covered by the product of its environment. And so I just wanted to point that out from this verse. And so we're just going to continue on with this verse. And we're going to move on to verse 12, which says, Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Israel, Jacob said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said, Here I am, ready to obey you. Then Jacob said to him, Please go and see whether everything is all right with your brothers and all right with the flock. Then bring word back to me. So he sent him from the Hebron Valley, and he went to Shechem. And so we see here once again that Israel kept sending Joseph to his brothers to get reports from his brothers. What I see, Joseph don't work. Joseph does not work. What he does is supervise his brothers and bring his father report back. And I can guarantee you that in this case, if Joseph had the chance to come back, he would have given a bad report. But we find out later on in the verses that he never got a chance to come back to his father this particular day. So verse 15 says, Now a certain man found Joseph and saw that he was wandering around and had lost his way in the field. So the man asked him, What are you looking for? He said, I am looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing our flocks. Then the man said, They were here, but they have moved on from this place. I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And they saw him, this now is verse 18. And when they saw him from a distance, even before he came close to them, they plotted to kill him. Now, it's gotten to that point where his brothers hate him so much, to the point where they're ready to get rid of him. I mean, that's how much they hated him. That's how much Joseph frustrated them. That's how much they resented their father, because they knew that killing Joseph would affect their father's health and well-being and hearts. But they did not care because they were deeply hurt. Now let's move on to verse 19. It says, They said to one another, Look, here comes this dreamer. Now then, come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, cisterns, underground water storage. Then we will say to our father, A wild animal killed and devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Now Reuben, the elders, heard this and rescued him from their hands and said, Let us not take his life. Reuben said to them, Do not shed his blood, but instead throw him alive into the pit that is here in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him to kill him. And he said this so that he could rescue him from them and return him safely to his father. I'm just going to say this. You've got to love the firstborns. Let me tell you something about my oldest brother. I love my oldest brother because I can imagine my oldest brother doing something like this for me. I'm still responsible for this kid. Actually, my oldest brother does that too. I'm still responsible for this kid, even though I'm a grown woman. Actually, don't mind him. I'm a grown woman. But yeah. And so Reuben is playing that role of the oldest brother, taking responsibility of his brother, Joseph. Now, does it mean that Reuben was treated differently from the other brothers? No. He experienced the same maltreatment or whatever the case is. He experienced the same misbehavior from Joseph like the rest of his brothers, but he never allowed that to bother him because he had taken on that role as the firstborn, the oldest, which is protector, responsible. And so I say this because every oldest sibling I've ever met are like the most responsible people you will ever meet, really. because they just carry that weight upon their shoulders. So this is what Reuben does here. But we're gonna move on from that. So hey, shout out to the firstborns. We love you. All right, so in verse 23, it says, now when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, the distinctive multicolored tunic which he was wearing. So one of the first things that they did to him was to strip him of his identity, to take away from him that thing that gave him confidence, that thing that was a representation of who his father had made him to be. And this is so symbolic to the way the devil messes with us. When the devil wants to mess with you, first he strips you away of your identity. You start to forget who you are in Christ. You start to forget that you're a child of God and that you can do all things through Christ that strengthens you. And so be mindful of that in the sense that you constantly remind yourself of who you are in God. And how do you know who you are in God? You've got to read your Bible, because that's where God tells you who you are. All right, so let's just be mindful of that. And we'll continue on to verse 24, which says, then they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, but there was no water in it. Verse 25, then they sat down to eat their meal. When they looked up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, east of the Jordan, with their camels bearing ladanum resin for perfume and balm and myrrh, going on their way to carry the cargo down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood murder? Come, let us instead sell him to these Ishmaelites and Midianites and not lay our hands on him, because he's our brother and our flesh. So his brothers listened to him and agreed. So backstory here a little bit. A lot of you should remember who Ishmael was, right? Ishmael was the first son of Abraham, but it was the first biological son of Abraham, but he was not the heir. So spiritually, he was not considered the first son, but physically, he was the first son. And if you remember, Abraham sent Ishmael away from Isaac, his son. And because of that, Ishmael never had a relationship with Isaac. And so now, Ishmael's descendants, of course, don't know Isaac, don't have a relationship with him. And here they are about to buy one of their distant cousins, basically. They're about to buy one of their distant cousins. But another thing that I saw here is Judah interjecting and saying, hey, let's not sell him. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him instead. Now, here's the thing. What Judah did not know he did was he was instrumental in getting Joseph to where God wanted him to be. God wanted Joseph to be sold as a slave, because the slavery for Joseph was a refining moment for him. And Judah played a role. Why was it that Judah also requested that his brother not be killed? I mean, he was also maltreated as well. This just goes to show about the heart of the person in this sense. And we get to know who Judah was later on. But let me just fast forward to a whole lot of years. The lineage of Jesus came from Judah. Now, it wasn't that Jesus was biologically from the line of Judah, biologically. It was that the man, Joseph, that raised Jesus was from the line of Judah. And so we see how, in my opinion, God rewards Judah like that, right? All right, but we're going to move on. So we move on to verse 28, which says, Then, as the Midianites and Ishmaelite traders were passing by, the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. So they took Joseph as a captive into Egypt. Now Reuben, unaware of what had happened, returned to the pit, and to his great alarm found that Joseph was not in the pit. So he tore his clothes in deep sorrow. He rejoined his brothers and said, "The boy is not here. As for me, where shall I go to hide from my father?" Then they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a male goat, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they brought the multicolored tunic to their father, saying, "We have found this. Please examine it and decide whether or not it is your son's tunic." Obviously, we know that they not only sold their brother to slavery, but they are now plotting on or devising on how to deceive their father and make him think that he was dead. Verse 33, and he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn in pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes in grief, put on sackcloth, and mourned many days for his son. I'm going to say this real quick before I move on. How cruel must these children have been to watch their father mourn for many days for a child that never died, a child that they knew what had happened to him. And they had made their father think that he was dead. And they kept that a secret. And let me tell you something. They kept that a secret for a very long time. I mean, a very long time. Well, let's move on to verse 35. It says, "Then all his sons and daughters attempted to console him, but he refused to be comforted and said, 'I will go down to Sheol, the place of the dead, in mourning of my son.' And his father wept for him. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Midianites sold Joseph as a slave to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the royal guard." So I want to say this before we move into the prayer points, is that if you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation and you know that you are a child of God and you know that God has plans for you, do not be afraid. If God has allowed you to go through that uncomfortable situation, it's because there's something He wants to bring out of you from that situation. So this is what I suggest that you do. Number one, submit to God. Submit to the will of God. Find out from God what He wants you to learn, what He wants you to do. And just submit to His will in that sense. And allow God to remold you or reshape you or refine you in the way that He wants to. Allow Him to now get rid of all those raw materials, all those things that have came from you becoming a product of your environment. Let Him help you get rid of that so that He can refine. That's the refining moment. So in this case, this was a very uncomfortable situation for Joseph, to be a slave. From being the favorite son to being a slave must be a very uncomfortable situation. But this was also a refining moment for Joseph, because God needed to work on Joseph's character. And we're going to see that in the other chapters, and we see how he goes from this arrogant kid to this responsible man. All right, I'm not going to spoil the story too long. But so what we're going to do is just move on into the prayer points and go into the verse of the day. So the prayer point that I have a few, about 5 of them. The first one is you're going to ask God to teach you how to walk in humility so that you don't officially become a product of your environment. So one of the prayers that I pray on a regular basis is I ask God to search me, search my heart, whatever it is that I need to work on, that God should just expose it so that I can work on it. Whatever it is that I need to get rid of, God should reveal it to me and help me to get rid of it. So this is one of those prayers that I'm suggesting that you pray. And then the second prayer point is to ask God, ask God to search you and expose every ounce of pride in you that God may uproot it. And anything else that is in you that God needs to remove or work on to help you with that. Then the third prayer point is you're going to ask God to surround you with a community of people that genuinely love you. And the reason I put this prayer point there is because nobody corrected Joseph. He had a bad behavior. He was behaving bad, but no one corrected him. No one said, hey, this is wrong. Stop behaving like this. This is arrogant. No one said anything. It's either they hated him for it or, in the case of his father, enabled it. So pray that God surrounds you with the right people that will treat you with love, people that can correct you, the right community that will encourage you, support you, correct you, pray for you, help you in whatever way it is. And then the fourth prayer point is you're going to ask God to send helpers into your life that can help bring you out of difficult situations. Now, if there is a need for this difficult situation. So for example, Reuben was a helper that was intended to bring Joseph out of the difficult situation. But Judah was the one that God used to bring Joseph out of death because his other brothers wanted to kill Joseph. And that dream and that future put an end to it completely. But Judah was the destiny helper that God used to not only keep him alive, but direct him in the right course. All right, so the last prayer point is you're going to pray for the firstborn in your family. I just praised my firstborn, my oldest brother. I don't have kids yet. But yeah, firstborns, they play a huge responsible role in the family. So there's a lot on them. So pray for them, pray for protection, pray for guidance, pray for direction, for wisdom, strength, the strength to continue to take on their responsibilities as firstborns. Pray for them on that. And so we're going to move on to the verse of the day, which is the last thing that we're going to talk about before we go, because the time is really gone. So the verse of the day that I chose is Reuben said to, it's in verse 22, which says, Reuben said to them, do not shed his blood, but instead throw him alive into the pit that is here in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him to kill him. And he said this so that he could rescue him from them and return him safely to his father. And the reason I chose this as the verse of the day is to just think about it. Think about the people that God has placed in your life to be a helper to you. Think about the ones that have succeeded. Think about the ones that didn't succeed, but at least they tried. Think about even you, if God has placed you to be a destiny helper to someone, and ask God for guidance on that. So that was the reason why I chose this verse of the day. I'm probably sure I could have chosen something else. But if you have something else that you want to meditate on as a verse of the day, or even multiple verses of the day, please feel free and select your verses of the day. If you want to add more prayer points or change the prayer points, please feel free to do that. This is meant to be a guide for you as you study every single chapter. All right, so thank you so much for joining me. I know I've spent a lot of time, but we're going to continue on with our story. And the story about Joseph doesn't end there, but we're going to talk briefly about Judah in the next chapter, which is chapter 38, and just share what I find out about this guy, Judah, because he's starting to seem like a very interesting guy. All right, so thank you so much and have a blessed night. I will see you all tomorrow.